What could possibly go wrong?
In 1995, Pete Sampras won the U.S. Open and Wimbledon. George Clooney made his first big movie. A bomb destroyed the federal building in Oklahoma City. O.J. Simpson was acquitted of murder. And we also came close to an accidental nuclear missile launch.
On January 25th, 1995, the United States launched a rocket from Norway to study the Northern Lights. We told the Russians that we were going to launch that rocket, but somebody in Moscow forgot to pass word on it.
That fit exactly the characteristics of the beginning of a nuclear strike. One missile coming over, exploding in the atmosphere, sending out an electromagnetic pulse that would fry all the electronics, radars, surveillance, computers in the country to be attacked, followed by an onslaught of nuclear weapons. And for the first time in the nuclear age, the Russians actually opened up the nuclear football. They went to President Yeltsin, they opened up the command and control launch codes, the button, put it on the desk, and said, we're under attack. Fortunately, Yeltsin wasn't drunk, and he didn't believe what the military was telling him. He said there must be some mistake.
That clip was from the new documentary Countdown to Zero, which makes a really strong case against countries, including ours, having nuclear weapons. It also makes a really good case that being against nuclear weapons isn't just for hippies anymore. Take a look at who appears in this film as supporting the notion of a nuclear-free world. Yes, Jimmy Carter, but also the late Robert McNamara, F.W. de Klerk, Richard Burt, Pervez Musharraf, Tony Blair, Mikhail Gorbachev, Richard Cizik, Tom D'Agostino, James Baker III, and the late Ronald Reagan from when he was president. Joining us now is Lawrence Bender, the producer of Countdown to Zero. Mr. Bender, thank you for being here tonight.
So great to be here.
You talked to Mikhail Gorbachev in the film. For all his regrets about not being able to reduce nukes more with Ronald Reagan, he seems optimistic about President Obama's agenda. Do you feel the same way?
Optimistic?
Yeah.
You know, it's funny, I do. I feel like this is an idea whose time has come, and it's one of these things where this is not a liberal idea anymore.
Yeah.
And as you said, Ronald Reagan started this whole thing with the START Treaty. And the START Treaty that's going to be hopefully ratified in the Senate is something that's supported by a lot of Republicans. And I feel like post-Cold War, post-9/11, people are starting to change the way they think about nuclear weapons. For instance, Henry Kissinger, George Shultz, Sam Nunn, and Bill Perry wrote an op-ed article in 2007 and then 2008 kind of starting this whole thing, talking about why the reduction of nuclear weapons are important post-9/11. That is not Russia and the United States that the main threat is going to be, but from a terrorist, potentially. And so people like that, people like Secretary Baker, who's in our movie, and maybe if Mitt Romney saw our movie, he'd feel the same way.
If he did, he still wouldn't campaign on it. Remember, he's first, not France. He's inexplicable. If the U.S. and Russia went to zero, right? You make the case the U.S. and Russia have 96% of the world's nuclear weapons.
Right.
If the U.S. and Russia went to zero, why would that make it more likely for countries like North Korea or Iran to give up on the nuclear dream as well?
I mean, that's a great question, and we talk about this in the movie too. And it's not that. It would be naive to say, well, if we reduce, then Iran's not going to want a nuclear weapon. No one wants to be naive about it. But I think the idea is, and by the way, the Global Zero has a commission of 25 military leaders and political leaders that are backed by quite a few people, former heads of states, national military commanders, and so forth. The idea is that if the United States and Russia, who own most of the nuclear weapons in the world, they need to take the leadership and reduce. And as they begin to reduce and get to low enough numbers, that the other countries are going to feel pressure to start reducing. And as we start to create a circular downward spiral of nuclear weapons, then there's going to be pressure, more pressure, and less tolerance for countries like Iran to either get it or North Korea to have it. And so the pressure will become a downward pressure as opposed to the Cold War, where it was an upward cycle.
And it's a good point, and made almost parenthetically, that this is sort of what happened with chemical weapons. And at some point, chemical weapons became taboo. It doesn't mean that they were wiped off the face of the earth, but they became unacceptable.
Exactly. And in the Global Zero concept, basically, is the only way to get rid of the nuclear threat, 100% get rid of it, is to secure and lock all the nuclear materials around the world, which the president, his summit was about a couple months ago in D.C., and to get rid of all the nuclear weapons internationally, worldwide. And only then can there be a true the threat of terrorism, nuclear terrorism, is going to be, diminished.
One of the things described in the film is at a closed session in the Senate, Joe Biden, now the vice president, essentially gets a nuclear weapon, minus the nuclear material, minus the uranium or plutonium, gets it delivered to the Senate hearing room. Can you just explain that?
It's a scary concept. But they were doing Senate hearings, and he was like, okay, I don't believe it. Prove it. And they literally went off. It's something that certain colleges do in the graduate programs, is they ask them to build a nuclear bomb based on what they find on the internet. And lo and behold,
all commercially available components. Right?
All commercially available components. And they did it. They built it, minus the fissile material, of course, right, and brought it into the Senate. And I think at that point, everyone goes, okay, this is a problem.
Yeah. It's an incredible story and an incredible issue, and you've done a really good job, I think, lighting a fire under a lot of people on this. So thanks. Really good to meet you.
My
Thanks
pleasure.
for doing
Thanks
it.
to meet you.
Lawrence Bender is, of course, producer of Countdown to Zero. If you have the opportunity to see it anywhere, you really should, even if it's just for the Joe Biden anecdote. The Republican Party is test driving a Reach Out to the Little People initiative that they're calling America Speaking Out. The top House Republican John Boehner is hosting a kickoff confab for America Speaking Out tomorrow. The idea is to hammer out a plan for the fall election season using topics like American prosperity, providing Americans the opportunities to succeed, and American values, protecting those things we hold dear. In the interest of transparency, they're going to stream the America Speaking Out event live on the internets. Congressman Boehner's chief of staff sent out an email message saying, quote, America Speaking Out is an unprecedented initiative to listen to the American people and give them a voice in crafting solutions to grow the economy. Listening to the American people, giving them a voice. Who is the them in that sentence? We asked Kent Jones to look into it. Hi, Kent.
Hi, Rachel. Well, them. Yeah. You know, the Republicans have really widened their net this time. Mm-hmm. They've invited a group of people to this meeting that they never hear from, like, ever.
Okay.
Ever.
Fascinating.
They've been shut out, ignored, consigned to the shadows of government. Until now. Thanks to the vision of Congressman John Boehner, one group will finally be heard from at the America Speaking Out meeting. Lobbyists. Congressman Boehner has extended the hand of welcome to representatives of such marginalized organizations as the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the National Association of Manufacturers, the National Federation of Independent Business, and the National Association of Home Builders. For lobbyist Americans, the question has always been, who will speak for me? For once, they will. Until now, lobbyist Americans have never had a voice in formulating Republican policies. Except when it came to health reform, Wall Street reform, climate change, a jobs bill, and some other things. But mostly, their silence has been deafening. Their attendance at the America Speaking Out meeting means maybe our nation can put this shameful chapter behind it and finally admit that lobbyists have ideas too, just like the rest of us. Thank you, John Boehner. And remember, they're called special interests because they're special.
Thank you, Kent. Reparations may be in order as well.
Could
Appreciate
be.
it. All right, thank you. Lieutenant Colonel Victor Fehrenbach has served in the United States Air Force with distinction for almost 19 years. He's logged more than 2,000 flying hours and nearly 1,500 fighter hours. He has flown 400 combat hours, including the longest sorties in the history of his squadron. Colonel Fehrenbach estimates that the military has spent $25 million training him. But in 2008, he was outed as a gay man by a civilian. That began the long process of getting fired. Or, as the Pentagon likes to put it, separated from the military. Today, Colonel Fehrenbach is still awaiting word on whether he can continue to serve as an active duty airman. Next month, he will celebrate his 19th anniversary in the Air Force with only one more year until retirement, if he makes it that far. Lieutenant Colonel Victor Fehrenbach joins us now for the interview from Boise, Idaho. Colonel Fehrenbach, thank you very much for coming back on the show. It's good to see you.
Thank you, Rachel. Good to see you.
It's been about 15 months since you found out you were being